you're very welcome to the podcast. My name is Anita Bourne and I'm the founder of the Femcast, a podcast and website driven by a passion for empowering women and promoting gender equality. Through the Femcast, we are making it our mission to educate, empower and encourage women to harness the power of their voices, share their stories and raise awareness of the crucial issues affecting women today. By amplifying women's voices, the Femcast aims to strengthen women's rights and celebrate the achievements of women everywhere. We are passionate about making a positive impact through storytelling, advocacy, and creating a supportive community to act as an inspiration to others who aspire to effect change. Come visit our website www.thefemcast.com for more information on what we do and resources to help you. In this episode, we talk about the impact of bullying on the brain and the need to raise awareness about brain science. Jen emphasises the importance of understanding how bullying affects the brain and how it can lead to mental and physical health problems. We discuss the need to educate parents, teachers and individuals in various settings about the harmful effects of bullying on brain development. We also highlight the concept of neuroplasticity, which offers hope for repairing and strengthening the brain after experiencing bullying. Jen emphasises the role of empathy and the damaging effects of bullying on empathy neural networks, and stresses the need for adults to take responsibility for addressing bullying and teaching children about its consequences.
I just want to get the science out there. I'm just so thankful to chat with you and for you to be using your platform. I mean, it's an uphill battle to change how people think, and people just are ignoring brain science completely, not in a purposeful way. They just haven't been introduced to it, and I think it feels intimidating for some people. So I'm just working hard to make sure that, we get the information out of the laboratory into the hands of moms and dads and children and parents and teachers and coaches and people at work. It's going to change everything. Just speak your truth. I was bullied at work. I was unbelievably harmed. It affected my mental health and my physical health in terrible ways. We need to change that.
You're very welcome this morning, Jen. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Anita. So lovely to see you.
And see you again too. I've read The Bullied Brain and have loved it. It has helped me greatly from talking to you, my circumstances around it. And I just feel it's a book that should be in every school, every university, and everybody that's starting in the workplace, or even people going into relationships, and what is healthy and what is not acceptable. Because I don't think we know enough about what it does to the brain. If, for example, we were with a partner, or as has happened to me in the workplace, if somebody had hit me with a baseball bat and I got a concussion, which sometimes that can be life threatening, something would be done about it. But because it's invisible, bullying the brain, it's invisible to the human eye and people don't really get it. Some people do, and how horrible and awful an experience it is. I really feel this should be in every school and university. So was that your purpose? That was the whole purpose of the book, was to get it out there and into the hands of educators.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think our young people who are becoming more and more mentally ill, the incidence of mental illness in our youth populations is staggering. And they've grown up with the internet. So they've grown up with this kind of constant barrage of information, and yet they're not getting key knowledge about their own self, their own development, and especially their own brain. And so when I was pulled into a bullying situation at a school, an abuse situation, and that's when I started to really think about it and take a look at the research. And what I found in the research was absolutely different from what people believe. So, just as you said, Anita, we tend to privilege the body. We think if someone hurts the body, then it's very, very serious. And our laws reflect that. You will get it. If you hit someone with a baseball bat, chances are very good you will be criminally charged. But if you are in a child's face, a teenager's face, and yelling at them and berating them and putting them down and humiliating them, shaming them publicly in front of their peers, People might say, oh, it's because you're so passionate. Don't do it again. You need to do a boundaries course. You can't get in a kid's face like that. You know, maybe you were trying to motivate them, but those are old school methods that don't work. We would generate these types of excuses. The reality is, the yelling in the face of the teenager is just as harmful as hitting them with a baseball bat. And as you said, Anita, people don't understand that in that moment, the brain is being injured. It's being hurt. You can see it on a brain scan. And so, what's happening in the laboratories of neuroscientists is they're studying this phenomenon. They're seeing that all forms of bullying and abuse, including the ones that don't touch the body, can do significant harm to the brain. So, that's the really frightening and upsetting and critically important information. All our young people need to know it, and all our old people need to know it.
Mm. Yeah, I do think it starts with the adults who are responsible for children and their little brains developing. Can we talk about the neuroplasticity and all the research you've done?
Yeah, neuroplasticity, as you say, is the absolute key. And it's the really inspiring and empowering part of this. So when I looked at all the research in what the neuroscientists knew about bullying and abuse and how it harmed brains, I said to myself, after realizing how much extensive knowledge they have, I thought, well, they must also know, how do we repair the brain? How can we restore it to health if it's been hurt? And just like the body, the brain is incredibly adept. It's innately wired to heal and repair and restore. And so I fill my book with evidence-based practices, grounded in the research, all the different things each one of us can do to greatly improve our brain health, to repair the harm done, to recover our organic brain health completely, and maybe even strengthen it, maybe make our brain more high performing by doing the work. And it's very similar to getting in shape. So if you think of your brain as, using the comparison, thinking it's like a muscle, it's quite similar in that if you constantly stretch your brain, it becomes more flexible. If you constantly work out your brain, do brain exercises, do mindfulness, do these kinds of evidence based practices that show great healing and strengthening of the brain, if you do these things daily, you have to put in time and it's not a quick fix. But if you do that, you strengthen the neural networks that you want, and you can reduce the neural networks that you do not want. They don't serve you anymore. They bring unhappiness to you. They bring unhappiness to others, perhaps. We can change our brains all the way up until our last moment on the planet. And that's what the neuroscientists now know. We all have brain plasticity, neuroplasticity. It means we can change our brains by the environments we're in and by the practices that we keep.
Yeah, so it's not all bad news then, because I remember last year lying in the bed for months and just feeling so worthless, helpless, and thinking I'll never be right again. But after getting your book, it just gave me hope. You know that quote from Peter Sakari, is it? Who said, that fear is the dragon. And once you start seeing the dragon and have the courage, and that's what that book gave me. It was something I was waiting for, to say you won't always be like this, because I was in a group and two women had said they'd been bullied in their job as well. One was still going through it 5 years later, and another 10. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't do 10 years of feeling this awful. The scientists see that the brain hurts once it's bullied. Can we talk about that? How your brain hurts? And it could be just in passive aggressiveness. It doesn't have to be screaming in your face, but how it hurts and what happens.
Yeah, it's a really important question. So if we think about the brain as having two different systems, the first system is the sympathetic nervous system. That's essentially our stress response. So just as you say, in all kinds of different encounters with people, if our brain feels threatened, so it could be threatened by put downs or not inviting you to an important meeting, excluding you, laughing at you, making you feel ashamed of yourself, pushing you into kind of an out group, any of these subtle sort of aggressions that people do, and you see them in the workplace. Maybe they take your work and they don't give you credit for it. It's these types of behaviors that are very threatening to the brain. The brain is wired to survive, and it knows that its survival hinges on community. human beings can't survive like certain animals out in the forest or the jungle by themselves. We need to be together because that's where our strength lies and that's where our safety lies. So, whenever the brain is feeling threatened, the sympathetic nervous system just gets automatically activated. It's not like we purposely do it. And so, what happens when you describe these women who've been bullied? I feel so horrible for them because what their brain is doing is trying to protect them and keep them safe. So, it sees the world as a very malevolent place. The brain has become very hyper vigilant. So, it's like the threat response system, the stress system, the sympathetic nervous system, it's very activated. And when your nervous system is very activated, you're pumping up cortisol automatically. It's a stress hormone, very healthy if you're in immediate danger, very unhealthy if it keeps getting activated. And it pumps up into your brain and your body, and it can make you very, very unwell. So imagine these poor bullied people. They think the world is dangerous. The brain thinks that all circumstances are threatening. It's pumping up cortisol like crazy. And when it does that, it's taking resources from all the other things that brains do, like having fabulous relationships with people, like feeling loved, like being creative, being spontaneous, being a problem solver, doing really great productive work and critical thinking. The brain it's miraculous the things it can do. But if it's zeroed in on danger, then it's not well. So the evidence-based practices in the book, as you know, Anita, because you've
Mm.
read, they're all about activating, and we could do this ourselves. You don't need anyone to help you. And this is not me saying, oh, don't go and see a mental health professional or don't go and see a doctor. Of course you do those things. But just as we learned with the fitness revolution, that if we started to exercise our own bodies, of course you could still see the doctor, but you can also do a lot of things to make yourself less stressed out, more active, more energized, more resilient. And so exercise is a really good behavior for the brain, pulls down, it dampens down or deactivates this huge surge of cortisol, and it repairs harm to the brain, and it also prevents the kind of toxic stress that we have in the workplace or in the home perhaps, that or in a school, that can dismantle brain architecture. It can really do damage. It can be seen on a brain scan. It can shrink the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's involved in memory and learning and emotional tags. So we want everything in the brain to be healthy. And if it's full of cortisol, it's not healthy. So this is why we have these two. How does the brain hurt? It hurts by having the stress response system constantly activated. That hurts your body as well. It hurts your blood vessels. It leads to chronic health conditions. It hurts your heart. It's really bad for you. So it's critically important that all of our students, all of our teachers and coaches and colleagues at work, we all need to learn the science on how much those kinds of behaviors hurt the brain and what we can do to keep our brains healthy and high function.
Yeah. We seem to concentrate a lot on, children and their peers and how they're bullying each other in schools rather than look at, I've learned all this through your book as well, the adult child relationship, where we put it back on the kids instead of parents must take responsibility. They're seeing the bullying somewhere, something has happened their brain. I'm not excusing what they do, but if we could get to the bottom of that and teach children, we are teaching them kindness in schools, but if they knew the damage, it's like every time you said those unkind words, the nail, the analogy of the nail in the fence, once you pull the nail out, the hole is there and the fence is damaged. If kids could see the harmful, or even see the diagrams and the x-rays and the MRIs of the brains in work in progress when kids are bullying each other.
Absolutely. And it's so important too that a child that's doing the bullying or an adult that is bullying his or her children or his or her spouse or people at work, the individual that's bullying is doing damage to their own brain. Every single time they do those behaviors, they are wiring in really destructive brain anatomy, basically. Because really, if you think about it this way, what bullying does is it erodes our natural empathy. So to remind everybody, sometimes people mix up sympathy and empathy. Sympathy
Mm.
is when you feel sorry for someone. Someone's in a car accident, you're like, oh, I feel so much pity for you. I feel so much sympathy for you. That's horrible. That's different than empathy. Empathy is when someone's in a car accident and you think to yourself, I know exactly what that would feel like. I would feel so frightened. I would feel hurt. I would feel embarrassed that I made a mistake that led to this injury. I would feel all these different things. I would be thinking all these different things, and then I'd have all these intentions. That's empathy. Empathy is when you walk in someone else's shoes, you experience the world through their brain, basically, and their body. So it's one of our greatest gifts. The human brain is gifted with incredible empathy. It's how we stay alive when we're infants and children. We learn very quickly to read the room. We learn who the powerful adults are and what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're intending. And we adhere to that knowledge because that's how we're dependent on them. So if you are bullying someone, you're hurting your empathy neural networks. You are damaging your mirror neuron circuits, which is how we reflect and feel one another's pain and act to help one another. It ultimately leads to compassion if you're a healthy person. So, one of the ways in which I get people to understand how a bullied brain or an abusive brain is actually hurting itself is if next time you read a media story about someone who's finally been identified and held accountable for bullying or abusing children, you will see that they do the same behaviors over and over again. So, for example, famously, Larry Nassar, the doctor for USA Gymnastics, for 30 years, he abused these young girls sexually. And every single year, he does the same behaviors, like to a T. It's like he's trapped in a terrible theater production and he just has to follow the script. He's no longer even human. He doesn't actually relate to people. He doesn't see children. He doesn't see these young athletes. He just sees victims and he says the same words. He gives them the same candy. He does the same violence to them year after year after year. He no longer, you could argue, has an individualized, connecting, healthy, empathic brain. It's gone. Same thing with Harvey Weinstein. He puts on the same bathrobe. He goes to the same hotel. He invites the same young hire. He offers her a part in one of his movies. He then asks for a massage. It's a broken record. The guy did it for 30 years. So, Anita, going back to your point about if we held these adults accountable the first time they did it, we don't cover up, we don't enable them, we don't have institutional complicity like we see all the time in these abuse cases. We actually stop them. We said, hey, Larry, you're a really great doctor. You're mentally very unwell. Take 6 months off. You need to go to a rehab program where they rewire your brain. You can come back, but you'll never be alone with a child again. You have to be monitored until we're sure that your brain has returned to some form of health and well being. Same thing with Harvey. Harvey, brilliant film producer. Love your work. You can't abuse people, Harvey. You need to take 6 months to a year and get completely rehabilitated before you come back. We rehabilitate knees and shoulders. We need to start rehabilitating very harmful brains.
In workplaces, for instance, they have a history of it. They've done it for years. They've gotten away with it. They've never been held accountable. And the cycle continues. And the people who once validated what had happened are now contradicting their stories. I find that really bizarre and hurtful that you would continue knowing there's abuse going on. People are being hurt. You're a professional and you're continuing with it. It's like the Catholic Church here. You know, we all knew it was going on, but nobody wanted to go up against them.
Yeah, I've been studying that quite a bit because I actually ended up being a whistleblower. And I'm not a very courageous person. I'm not someone that's got like a really intense moral compass. I'm very much more an academic. I'm really interested in research and the big why questions. Why do we do what we do? Why do we have these patterns in society? Why do we fail to address it? What's going on? I don't see the world as heroes and villains. And yet I ended up becoming a whistleblower. And so I think a lot about why did I do that? And what happened to me when I did do it? And I know similar things happen to you. Speaking up just brings the house of cards down on you. I mean, you get so much retaliation for daring to say, hey, this has got to stop. It's incredibly unhealthy. We need to be protecting people from this type of abusive behavior, whether it's children or people in the workplace. And all
Yeah,
of a sudden, you're the enemy. You're enemy number one. It's like,
yeah.
what? How did that happen?
I just wanted to call out the abuse. and go about my business and leave because it was not healthy for me. I ended up in hospital from panic attacks. I ended up having surgery to get ulcers removed. I was covered in eczema. I couldn't sleep. I was constantly agitated. I had inflammation all over my body. The list was endless. I have heart problems now and I'm seeing a cardiologist. And that's all from one person and not been held accountable. I just wanted to walk away from all that. And it actually got worse when I left and called it out, which is absolutely horrendous.
It is horrendous and it's completely unnecessary. I ended up with ulcers all over my esophagus. And and it's so symbolic, daring to speak out, daring to say, look, this has to stop. The only reason that I actually was driven to do this is because one of the victims was my son. And there was everybody has their line. I allowed myself, well, I didn't allow myself, but I was sexually and physically and emotionally abused for 4 years, from 13 to 17, at the hands of three teachers. There were many victims, and they weren't held accountable until women in middle age took them to court in the early 2000s. So I was a victim myself, but I completely put it away. Like, just like you, I just wanted to get away from them. I just walked away. It's like I graduated from high school and it's like, bang, that self, that girl doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to be someone else. I'm going to just forget about her and what happened to her. And I tried to break it. But when my son was hurt and my son was having panic attacks and my son was being shamed and humiliated and called homophobic slurs, that's when, I mean, talk about the dragon. That's when the dragon came, and there's no stopping it. I mean, I will research this and speak about it and help people and try to get the science into schools and into the Catholic Church and into homes until my final day. Because just like you say, all those injuries done to you are invisible. And so somehow there's no accountability. I mean, children who've been emotionally abused can look perfectly, utterly healthy. Children who've been physically abused can look perfectly, utterly healthy. This was a study done by one of the leading researchers at Harvard. When they looked at those kids' brains, it was a mess. Their brains were complete by the and another really important study for people to understand is Romania. We privilege the body. We say if you give these babies in Romania, it's a long story. It was a political, just a dictatorship, and they forced people to have multiple children. They couldn't even afford to raise them. They all got put in these kind of factories. And these babies, they had food. They were changed. They had a crib. They had a shelter. And their brains were completely and utterly damaged because they didn't have human care and love and attention and holding and language and learning to walk with somebody who cared to help them when they fell down. So that neglect absolutely destroyed their brains. Bodies weren't beaten, they weren't sexually abused, they were neglected emotionally.
Mm.
So these are the kinds of, I mean, it's hard to hear this stuff. I know, and it's upsetting, but people need to know this information. We can take such better care of ourselves and such better care of one another if we know more about our brains.
I remember in college, our tutor told us about that. The babies that thrived were the ones that were held and nurtured, and the ones that were left in the crib. They died, some of them died even before two, just because they were never held or loved.
Well, and children, they've done all these studies on how to enhance children's learning. Children cannot learn language unless they have a human being speaking to them. They cannot learn it from a computer. So it's just such an indicator. Children need love and care and connection and language and learning from the powerful people in their world. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on being a whistleblower, that was so courageous. Thank you, because we got a book from it and the book previously, Teaching Bullies. But it would take a lot of courage, and where you got it when you're going through it yourself, your son is going through it. 10 years of researching, and more research and working with the scientists. I'm glad you did it, but I can imagine how hard it was and the
You
fear.
know I was so afraid. I had so many of the symptoms you described. I was constantly full of anxiety. You know what's an interesting part about being a whistleblower that I learned is that when you have to speak up and call somebody out and say they have to be held accountable, you're also aware that you're hurting them. You're causing them incredible suffering in their lives. And yes, you want the abuse to stop, but you also don't want the person being abusive to be harmed or lose their job or, be ashamed. So what I learned about whistleblowers is in the research, you do everything internally basically to protect the company. In my case, I did everything internally to protect the teachers that were being abusive and to protect the reputation of the school. But I knew it had to stop. I mean, can't be allowed. It's so, just as you described, it's so incredibly destructive. It hurts students. It can't be allowed. At the same time as it could have been dealt with within the school in a really healthy way, that there was a large group of parents, 30 and upwards parents, insisting that the teachers step down. But we all wanted them to get rehabilitated. We wanted them to be on paid leave for 2 years in order to get better. And also the victims that had spoken up, there was at least 13, 14 students had spoken up. They needed to be graduated and out of the school. They shouldn't be in a school with teachers who they were reported on. Psychologically, it's just so traumatizing. So this is what we work towards. And the school, the headmaster at the school and the board and the chaplain, they all just covered up. And they figured that they could just cover this up and get away with it. And they tried everything to just make it sort of, they actually re-victimized the students. And that for me, again, that was a big line. They tried to position the students who spoke up as liars. And that included my son. So my son is not a liar. He's never told a lie in his life. I mean, they wanted to say all of a sudden these 13, 14-year-old students, or these 13, 14 students, they actually were all the way from second year university down to grade 10, reiterating the identical behaviors of these people that just do the same broken record year after year, same words, same harassment, same berating, same denial of opportunity, same favoritism, same swearing, blah, blah, over and over again. The headmaster said that he quoted in this sort of bogus legal report, the lawyer wrote that other students had said that the students speaking up were telling nasty lies. It's like, why? Why would they do that? Why would any student do that who's never shown that type of behavior in their history at this school? My son had been there since grade 4. He'd never had an issue with a teacher. He'd never told a lie. He'd never been in trouble. He'd never been in trouble once at school. And then all of a sudden he speaks up like we tell kids to. Gotta be an upstander. Make sure you go tell a teacher if there's some bullying going on. As soon as you speak up, you're completely re-victimized by the powerful people in your world. It's shocking and unhealthy. And my son would tell you it did a lot more damage to him how he was treated by the administrators and the headmaster. That did way more damage to him than the actual abuse that had gone on for 2 years.
Oh my gosh, I don't know how a young teenager could go back into a room with people who have been abusive, because I know how it felt for me, and my body knew before I knew. Even my therapist said, your body knows before you even
Oh,
realize what's happening. And I would just, my heart rate would go up, I'd feel panic. I just can't imagine what it would feel like for a teenager who is scared. They know their names. It's not like it's anonymous. I just can't believe that that happened. I can believe it, actually.
the headmaster promised, of course, the students. Asked he asked me to take testimonies. He asked a woman who's a parent at the school as well as a lawyer. He asked her to take testimonies. We took direct testimonies from these students. I took 8 testimonies at the request of the headmaster. And he promised all the students confidentiality, and all the students agreed to let him read their testimonies. He interviewed the ones that were at the school, and he broke confidentiality. He said the boys' names to one of the abusive teachers who spoke up. He gave them the boys' names. And it's on email. I mean, it's just a fact. It was my son missed 172 days of school in grade 12. He was on the headmaster's honor roll leading up to his final year. He didn't go to graduation ceremony. They really tried to destroy him, but they did fail. He's incredibly strong, resilient, smart kid. He just has absolute disdain for these people. They're just liars. They have talk endlessly all this business about, their mission statement and their vision statement and how they
Oh,
care about
yeah.
students. It's just all lies. I don't know how they sleep at night, these people, but they just keep doing what they do.
We used to have those mission statements up around the job too. Nobody ever actually read them. I could read your frustration in the book. After 10 years of research, scientists doing the jobs they're doing, MRIs proving the damage and the hurt brains, and yet we're met with resistance. Can you imagine a society that actually said, look, let's get ahead of this. Let's start working on it now. Let's look at the children. Let's look at the children and their peers. Let's look at the adult to child relationships. Let's look at the adult to adult in intimate relationships, friendships, siblings, any kind of relationship where there's bullying, and just cut all that out. We'd have less people in prison, less people. Well, if you're a bully, I think you do get away with a lot. I'm not saying they're getting away with not doing prison, but you know what I mean? It's the bullied that go on to, because they're so hurt, that they do stuff that if they had the chance and weren't bullied, wouldn't do.
That's exactly it. I'm going to give you two important statistics that support exactly what you just said. The first one, this one is in the book. I couldn't believe it when I learned that 70%, that's 70% of inmates in the California prison system, which is enormous, they were in foster care. That tells you right there. They didn't get to grow up in homes where they were cared for, they were loved, they were protected. I mean, and this is not saying foster care didn't try its very best, but these were kids that couldn't stay with their own families because their own family was so unable to care for them. So, I mean, yeah, and now they're in prison. Is it their fault? Are they bad people? Or do they have very, very traumatized brains? And if their brains are traumatized, why aren't we trying to rehabilitate them? That's what we should be doing, is saving them. And the other statistics I want to share with you is from 2000 to 2018. This is again in the United States. Youth suicide, so that's 10-year-olds to 24-year-olds, increased 57%. So we're not doing well as a society. We are getting unhealthier. We are getting more bullying, more abuse, more cover-ups, and we have to change it. We just have to simply change direction right now, get the science out there, start reading and learning about our brains. We can get better. We can change everything.
I was astonished to find that you can still slap children in the States.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story actually, because when I wrote Teaching Bullies, that was in 2015, and it's basically exploring and analyzing and researching what emotional abuse does to children. So I was looking at, because again, as you and I talked about, we have a tendency in society to privilege the body and ignore the brain. So for example, we used to think the concussions didn't matter. It wasn't a big deal. Just you got your bell rung, get back out into play and show the team and the coach how tough you are. Well, we now know that a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. We can't see it with the naked eye, but you can certainly see it on a brain scan, and it's very, very serious in many cases. And so it's a breach between the blood-brain barrier of the skull. It's very, very serious. You can die from it. It's very serious. But it's a classic example of how, if someone broke their leg in a football match, they would be instantly treated by professionals. They'd get lots of compassion. They'd be rushed off to hospital. An x-ray would be taken. They would repair the bone, etc. Say, a much more serious injury happens to the brain, and we act like it's just not a big deal. That's how little we knew about and know about our brains. So going back to the Teaching Bullies, it's 2015, the telephone rings, I pick it up, and it's this man who's written a book about corporal punishment in the United States. And he says to me, I loved your book. I love Teaching Bullies. It's so important. The research is so important. But why didn't you talk about corporal punishment? And I said, oh, because it's illegal in Canada. And, that wasn't what was happening. And he said, well, it's not illegal in 19 states in America. I was so shocked. So in this book, I took a look at that. So in The Bullied Brain, heal your scars and restore your health, I took a look at corporal punishment, and I learned that the neuroscientists are well aware, just like the psychiatrists and psychologists, that hitting a child causes damage to the brain. It hurts the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is engaged. I mean, the brain works as a whole. You can't really isolate parts out, but just for the sake of layman talking for us to understand, the prefrontal cortex is engaged in helping you self regulate and behave well and think about consequences and be kind of reasonable and rational. And children's prefrontal cortexes aren't mature until they're 24 or 25. This is why kids do lots of crazy, impulsive things and teenagers take these ridiculous risks. It's because their brain is not fully mature. And when you strike a child, you are rattling the prefrontal cortex, you are making it full of angst. So it's not healthy. It's really unhealthy to hit anybody, let alone a powerless, much smaller child. And so one of the things that I took a look at was the precedent setting case. So it was in the 1970s, and there were three teachers. Two teachers held a 14-year-old boy, and the other teacher hit him repeatedly on the legs with the paddle, which is just basically, it's like a baseball bat. And the child's legs were so badly damaged, he had to go to hospital. They were black and blue. And the parents launched a lawsuit against the school and the teachers. And so it went to court, and the judge ruled that there was no law that called that type of behavior cruel or unusual, and that if this boy was an inmate in prison, prison guards are, it's against the law for two to hold a prisoner and the other one to another prison guard to beat the inmate, but you can do it to a child. And so this is a really important part of my book as I try to get adults to understand that when children bully each other, which we talk about endlessly, as if it's somehow related to child behavior, which it's not. It's learned behavior. So nobody wants to talk about who are the adults that teach bullying behaviors to children, but the fact of the matter is it's adults who role model it, it's adults who teach it, children learn it, children do it. And we never sort of go upstream and stop the bullying behaviors in our own adult populations. But, if you and I saw two 14-year-old boys grab a kindergartner and two of them held this little 5-year-old down and another 14-year-old beat him with a stick, you and I would say, oh, that's bullying. That's really bad. There's going to be consequences for those 14-year-olds. They're going to get suspended or even expelled. They are very
call
bad.
the police.
You call the police, maybe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, we're making more and more stringent criminal laws for children. But the irony is when teachers do it, we change our language. We don't call that bullying. In 19 states in America, we call it legal, and we say that it is discipline. And it's going to teach the child how to behave better. That's absolutely all of it inaccurate and wrong. It's like being in a George Orwell novel. It's crazy. So this is the kind of stuff I want to see change. The police told us when our son was repeatedly assaulted by one teacher, and an assault does not have to touch the body. It just needs to be so threatening that the person reasonably believes that they might be hurt. So multiple boys described to me these scenes where the teacher would point to the floor in front of them, everything would stop, the students would watch, and he would start yelling in my son's face. And my son's an auditory learner, so yelling for him is particularly painful. So he's yelling, 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 basically questioning his worth. And when my son couldn't take it anymore, my son's a big guy, 6'4", but when he couldn't take it anymore and would start to back away, the teacher would grab him and hold him in for more. So if I did that to you, Anita, in the workplace, I would be charged with assault. You cannot do that, especially if I was your boss and I was in a position of power over you. You can't do that. If you and I were in a bar together and I started yelling in your face and threatening you and then grabbed you when you tried to get away from me, I would be criminally charged with assault. This happened hundreds of times, my son said, and one of the boys described it as vicious. Another boy described it as how they wanted to stop it, but they couldn't stop the scene of public shaming because it was a teacher who was doing it. And so we went to the police, and the police said to us, oh, that's never going to fly. The judge is just going to say that that was motivation. It's like, why do we change the terms when adults are bullying children? There's such a massive power imbalance. And yet, as soon as an adult's doing it, somehow we find a way to excuse the behavior and let it go on.
Yeah. And it still carries through then in universities, where they're bullied in workplaces and on the pitch, in sports, instead of like getting rid of it early on and making sure children are safe, they feel safe, their brains are safe. Safety should be number one. We have nothing in place for a bullied brain, Jen, and perpetrators are never held accountable. Why are we not changing that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. When I took a look at the school system, I mean, I was a teacher for 20 years. I taught at university level, I taught college level, I taught in high schools. So I've really spent a long time being part of that educational model. And really, what I learned is, and I hope to see this change, we've gotten to a place where our education system is designed to teach children how to obey. We teach them to be compliant, and if they aren't obeying and compliant and doing as they're told and replying back with the information given to them, so we have this old idea. It's like the teacher pours knowledge into the child's head, and then the child shows the teacher that the knowledge is in their head by writing a test. And I mean, oh my gosh, there's absolutely fabulous teachers out there. There's incredible educational programs. They're so dedicated. They're doing amazing things. But I'm just talking about the education system in general. And in general, we've gotten into an outdated model, because really what we should be teaching young children, right from 5 years old on, and what we should be teaching certainly our young people, our teenagers, is getting them to understand their brains, how to keep their brains safe, how to keep them incredibly healthy, and how to bring them to their full potential in terms of performance. Because we are well aware now, we have the research and we have the programs where Dr. Michael Merzenich, Brain HQ, we should have all children doing that program daily, just like we get them to run around outside at recess. And we get them to play sports because it's so good for their brain and body. They also need to do exercise for their brain training. So really, school isn't about pouring knowledge into the brain anymore and then the child memorizing it and showing that they know it and obeying all the rules. Really, what we're doing is looking at brains as very distinct entities. Every single person has a unique brain, just like a fingerprint, and every single person can strengthen their brain, no matter what they've been through, no matter the kinds of challenges that they've had. And so, really, that's what school needs to be more about: independent thinking, a recognition that we all have neurodiversity. We're so obsessed with bodies and what people look like, but really, we need to start looking inward and visualizing our incredible brains. So, I mean, one of my chapters is, one of the action steps of things I encourage people to do is to disobey. Stop following the rules. Stop living in the outdated paradigm. The outdated paradigm is constructed on bullying and abuse. Turn on the television, put on the internet. The second you do, you see adults in positions of top prestige and power in our world, and they are incredibly bullying. And they're not held accountable, and it's blatant. And yet we tell children, don't do it, but the most powerful, prestigious people can do it. And this mixed message is incredibly unhealthy.
Well, yeah, that saying, don't do as I do as I say. Children watch everything. They take it in, they absorb it from a very young age. They mirror people's behavior, they mirror adults' behavior. That's where they learn it from. At
Exactly.
some stage, we have to stand up and say, adults need to change in order for these kids to blossom and flourish and to grow up with healthy brains, not hurt.
If adults were focused on brain health, if they privileged and prioritized empathy and compassion, that's exactly what you would see in child populations. But right now, we have child populations where children and teenagers and young adults, very few of them know anything about their brain. They are not told in the school system or in sports or anywhere to pay attention to their brain or learn about it and learn to work with it, not against it. They don't know that during adolescence, their brain is undergoing incredibly intense change that puts them at risk. They don't know that they're 4 times more likely to die during that time of their life than in childhood or adulthood. They don't know that their leading causes of death for them are car accidents and suicides. And both of those deaths are preventable by understanding brain development and how rapidly and intensively adolescent brains are changing, it's really got to change. And I think we can do it. I'm so hopeful that if we could get the science, we can get people reading The Bullied Brain, Heal Your Scars and Restore Your Health, we'll get a groundswell of people that want to see this change happen. And certainly for our children.
Mm. I know there's programs here in schools for suicide prevention because of, you've mentioned it before, bullycide, which that was the very first time I've ever heard that phrase. When you say car accidents, is it because their brains isn't developed and they don't see the danger and speed?
It's actually so an adolescent brain starting at 13 usually, it can be earlier. What happens is it's designed by evolution. So evolution has designed the adolescent brain to push them to leave the family cave. So the brain is primed to find a mate. So a teenager and a young adult will be leaving the family cave, which is very terrifying. It's very hard to do. So the adolescent brain is pumped full of risk taking because that's how they get the child out of the family cave, out into the world, going around corners, being out in the jungle, being out in the Serengeti, in the forest. It's primed by evolution. So adolescent brains are risk taking. That's why they drive too fast. That's why they speed and go around corners way too quickly. They're not cautious. They can't think of the consequences. Their brains don't imagine, that they could ever be hurt. They feel invincible. And this is all by evolution. They're not choosing it. They also become incredibly obsessed with their peers. They stop listening to adults. Really, what they care about is social standing. They care about what their peers think of them because this is the new group. This is the new family that evolution and their brain development is driving them to locate. So, this is why if you humiliate a teenager in front of their peers, you do extreme damage to them, really serious damage to their brain. And the other thing that they have, so they're risk taking, they're very reward seeking. They are looking for hits of dopamine. That's why they can't put their phones down. Any little social interaction gives them a hit of dopamine and they love it, especially if it's from a peer. So, yeah, I mean, I've designed a course actually for young people called Drive and Survive, where basically I just walk them through how much danger they're going to be when they drive and strategies they can use to work with their brain to keep themselves healthy and safe and get through this phase of brain development at around 24, 25.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I'll put that link on the bio so that people can click on and have a look at it. So, why do people bully in the first place, Jen?
Um, that is the whole key to everything. A person who is manifesting aggressive behaviors, they're targeting someone else, they are looking for victims, they want bystanders to witness this big show of aggression. These people are hurt. And as the psychologist Dr. Joseph Burgo says, they don't come from happy homes. They come from usually abusive homes, whether that's physical or emotional or sexual. And so when you see someone bullying, like if you think of your boss, even, one of the ways you might be able to forgive and move forward from what happened is understand that he actually is a very hurt person. I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying he shouldn't be held accountable. But the fact is, hurt brains hurt. They hurt themselves, they hurt others, they feel awful. So, this is the cycle we have to break. This is why when children see a child that's bullying, they should be taught not to be afraid or not to run and tell a teacher that someone's bullying or try and protect the victim. Yeah, all those things are important. But they also need to look at that child and understand that the child is waving the red flag of mental illness. They are publicly displaying that there's something very off about their brain and probably their circumstances. And really, you go and get a teacher because you're just as worried about the bully as you are about the victim. It's a cycle. People with healthy, happy brains that are being cared for and loved and brought to high performance and health, they don't need to find a victim. They're too busy being innovative and they're too busy producing something new or doing fabulous work or communicating or building relationships. They're not
Right.
looking for a victim. They're not codependent with the victim. The man that bullied you, he needed you way more than you needed him. He needed to construct a feeling of identity by putting you down. So I talked to this really interesting, very advanced Navy SEAL named Mark Devine because I struggle with forgiveness. And I said, how did you come to forgive your father? He had a very emotionally abusive father. And he said that he did this course, and it was a week-long course, and they meditated for 8 hours a day. So they did mindfulness practice, meditation practice, 8 hours a day. And what they had to do was imagine their abuser, visualize their abuser, reach deep back into themselves and see this abusive individual as a child, and think about all the things that must have happened to them when they were little that made them become the adult that's so abusive. And he said it was just incredibly liberating, and he was able to forgive.
So, what do you think then of people who have had those childhoods and don't abuse, go on to abuse and bully?
Well, I thought a lot about that because I suffered so much abuse myself, a lot of emotional abuse. I was very resistant at the sexual advances. So I was being constantly sexually harassed, but I was constantly pushing back because I didn't understand it. I couldn't understand why middle-aged men had any interest in me or the other 15-year-old girls. I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. I didn't understand it. And so then I became the target of constant humiliation because of course I didn't, you know, fall prey to their advances. So I started to think about, well, how come when I became a teacher, I didn't need to humiliate my students? I didn't need to do horrible things to them year after year. Why is that? Why didn't I become a very abusive teacher? And, I'm not saying I was a perfect teacher. I made all kinds of mistakes when I was teaching, but I wasn't a bully. I wasn't abusive. And so I was curious as to why that is. And I realized two things can happen, three things can happen. I did lots of psychology and lots of psychiatry. I never talked about the teachers, but I really tried to understand my inner mechanisms and how I was the way I was because I was very unhealthy myself. I was a split personality. I was out in the academic world being a high performer, doing, writing books and I'm so great. And then I'd come home and I would self-harm and I had a terrible eating disorder. And I was all the hatefulness and the bullying and the self-loathing, I turned it on myself. So I internalized what happened and I became a bully to my own self. And this is where bully side likely comes from. You identify with the aggressor and it's like you have to take it out on yourself and it's unbearable. So if you think about the abusive individual, they become that acts out their abuse day in, day out. They're a Dr. Jekyll and a Mr. Hyde. So they're the good doctor who's so respectable, the pillar of the community, and they say the mission statement and the visions and this and that. Behind closed doors, when no one can see them with their victims, the bully comes roaring out and does incredible damage. That's Mr. Hyde. So we've got the split personality of the bully who's out in the world externalizing their suffering. Then you've got the person like me who internalizes the suffering and takes it out on myself. Both things are mentally very unhealthy. So, this is what I realized in writing the book. And my heart goes out to people that are abusive, really, and to people that turn it on themselves. It's just all this huge lack of understanding of how our brains work. That's why we
Yeah,
need to learn about our brains.
yeah. And it's just crazy that it's just met with resistance instead of this is what we're going to teach kids, and this is what we want adults to teach kids, and this is how we want adults to behave.
Yep. It's an incredible uphill battle to get people to care about the science.
Yeah, because we're doing it with consent now. Finally, we're teaching our younger generations consent, what it feels like when it doesn't feel right. This is so important as well.
Yeah. I think the next generation are going to be the ones that really take off with the science and get really brain informed and brain empowered. What I loved about the research was learning that we can do so much by working with our brains, not against them. You can achieve because you can change your brain. You can really create the life that you want for yourself. Once you start putting in the evidence-based practices, you can be as happy as you want. You can be as caring as you want. You can stop bullying yourself or others. You can do anything you want by working hard with your brain, following what the science tells you. It's amazing.
Yeah,
It's exciting.
brilliant. Thanks, Jen. And I'm looking forward to our next one, which we'll be talking about women who are leaving domestic abuse, gender based violence, and how they can heal their brains. I recommend this book to everybody, The Bullied Brain. I'll put the links below where they can get this book and that course you run, because I know from my nephew learning how to drive, and every mom, when they send their kids out, they're always worried on the roads, even on a night out. It's just, that'd be a great, if they can see the danger and know how their brain works.
Yeah, exactly. It's just an online course, so they can really, what you need to do is watch multiple times. Young people, they don't learn it once. The key brain thing to learn with that is remember to repeat, repeat to remember. The brain learns by repetition at timed intervals. So, we make the mistake with driving. We put kids into a workshop for a weekend or a day, and we think that they now are going to be safe. It's not how the brain works. They have to practice all the time, just like they practice soccer and mathematics and music. They have to practice safety and brain knowledge.
Thanks so much, Jen. I look forward to next week.
Thank you for joining us on the Femcast. We invite you now to stay connected with us by hitting the subscribe buttons below and follow us across our social media channels at the Femcast. We value your feedback and reviews. By sharing ideas, insights and experiences, we can all learn, grow and make a meaningful difference. We also want to remind you that we care about your well-being. If any topics discussed on today's episode have raised concerns or you need support, please visit our website www.thefemcast.com for helpful resources and phone numbers. Thank you for being part of the Femcast.